And that brings us to our guest today that I like to introduce. From Port Huron, she has fostered 80 different foster children, Leona Mcbury. And I want to show some pictures of Leona's children, her child Anthony, and this story is about Mr. Zimmer had something to do in your case. Am I correct?
Yes, he did.
Now you have fostered 80 different children, so tell me, how did you happen to adopt your son Anthony?
I got Anthony back in September of '98 when he was 20 months old, and he remained in my care. I adopted him. The final adoption went through and he was approximately 4 years of age.
Okay, now you and your son, over a few years, got acquainted with Daryl Zimmer. Tell me, how did you go about meeting this person?
Well, my son met Mr. Zimmer back in July of 2010 when his friend and their family invited him to a campground / farm to go camping with him for the 4th of July weekend. I did not meet up or be introduced to Mr. Zimmer until December, I believe it was December 12th of 2010, when I was doing a Christmas benefit at a church on Range Road. And Mr. Zimmer had come in to pick up my son's friend and my son to go ice fishing at his farm. And his son's friend was there, introduced us, and told us Mr. Zimmer was a very nice man. The kids enjoyed it being out there, so I trusted him with my son because my son had been there before.
So he was an acquaintance of your son, and then you, after a while, you met him, and you thought he was probably real good with children and stuff.
Yes.
And you thought everything was going fine. You had a happy son, and you had a happy family, and then you ended up finding something out. What did you find out?
Well, back in March of 2011, my son had invited me to come and stay at the farm in a camper that was there that Mr. Zimmer had purchased on the property, so that I could go out there to be with my son on the weekends. And I was out there for 10 weekends, and it was like the last weekend out there. I ended up leaving like on the following Tuesday, and Mr. Zimmer ended up, which it would have been the 24th that I left the farm, and on the 25th was when I found out from my son's friends, the one that originally invited him to the campgrounds to begin with, had his sister had told me what had been going on at the farm for like 2 years with Mr. Zimmer and the boys, and my response was not very nice, but I immediately was to take my son to the sheriff's department to report the crime.
So your son was being raped by Mr. Zimmer along with, I believe, 8 or 9 other boys.
9 other boys, yes.
9 other boys. And you immediately, this was immediately reported to the police, right?
Yes, I had went to a friend's home first because I had had friends that I took to the farm, their children, and I wanted to confirm to them that their children had not been touched by Mr. Zimmer, and they were not. And the original phone call was made from their address. But my son and I followed the sheriff's back to the sheriff's department to file the original complaint.
Okay, well, the police, you know, they did their report, and did they cite you for any wrongdoing or?
No, none whatsoever. They told me, my son and I, that we were free to go home, that we did no wrong.
And they did a complete report and took all the information, and then.
Yeah, we were there from 9:30 in the evening until after midnight.
CPS got involved in this. And can you tell me a little bit about how they got involved in this?
Well, the morning after all of this happened with the sheriff's department, I had left my son with my friends, and I had went to my son's school and spoke with the assistant principal and informed her what had happened because my son was having behavior problems at school, and I wanted the school to be aware of why he was having behavior problems. And so with understanding what had happened to him, it explained his behaviors. And then when I had left the school called CPS, and within 6 hours my son was taken from me.
Okay, now, you went to the school to help your son because he had behavior problems. You just found out that he was molested. You reported it to the police, so I'm thinking you probably did everything all right. Did you tell the school that you reported this to the police?
Yes, I did.
And they felt that they had to call CPS?
Yes. And after CPS took them, I went straight to the sheriff's department and spoke with the deputy in charge of our case, and he said that they should not have taken my son. And I said, well, they did. He's like, they can't do that. I said, well, they already did it. What am I supposed to do?
And I heard there was quite a story behind CPS taking your son, the way they went about doing it. Can you tell us about that?
They met us, they had my friends call me on the phone so that I would answer the phone. And then they said that the state was at the house checking the children, and they wanted to make sure they were okay, the ones that were at the farm. And they wanted to see my son to verify that he was okay. So when they told us that they wanted to meet us somewhere, so we met at a party store parking lot. And when they got there, they told my son to sit in the car, and I'm like, well, that's not wise, because you said you wanted to see him to make sure he's okay. And they're like, well, we need him in the car. And then after he got in the car, they said they were removing him from me for his own good, his own safety. And then they proceeded to tell me that he had to go through a second interview the following morning, on Friday morning, with CANS Council, which is Child Abuse Neglect Services in St. Clair County, for a second interview, and that he'd be returned home Friday evening. And then I says, well, you need to tell him that so that he knows what's happening, because of his mentality, you know, he's not going to understand why he's being taken. And so they went to the car and told him the same thing. And then when my sister arrived to take my son, they had told her the same thing. She said, so he's going to be going home tomorrow night. And their response was, well, it'll be Monday at the latest, if we just need to get the interview. And within 22 hours, they had a rubber stamp paper from their office stating that they had orders from the court to remove my son from my care.
Well, why did they have to take him in the first place and then return him? I've never heard of that. Mm-hmm. Of course, you know, the family court is a lot different than the criminal court. They deal in family court on a preponderance of evidence, which is a, you know, I think so.
I think it's hearsay.
They say it's the greater weight, but this ex parte motion, when you got that paper, you never was represented when they went to the judge to remove your child. You weren't represented, so it was an ex parte motion.
Yes.
And it was preponderance of evidence, and it was of the greater weight because you had no representation at all.
Exactly.
And
And they've done none of that. They never showed any credentials or identifications when they took him either.
Was that, do you know if that was stamped by a judge, or was that rubber stamped?
I believe it was rubber stamped by a referee.
And we hear that all the time, the Mary Ann Goldbuttle case, that
Yeah.
was rubber stamped too.
Yeah, there was no court seals on any papers I received until I went to court on the 31st of May, and then I received a court sealed document, and at that point, they suspended all my contact with my son.
oh wow.
Now, what were some of their allegations that they had against you?
Well, basically, they said that I failed to protect my son. That was exactly what they told me when they removed him. You failed to protect him. I said, well, if I'd known he was being raped by a 55-year-old man, I would have never been on that property. They said, well, we need to remove him for his own safety.
And you went to that property and they decided something about being a bunch of junk around or something, or?
He had a farm out there, campground stuff,
And-
but he also did scrap things, and there was like piles of scrap, like metal, that the kids would tear apart trucks or cars and break them down and do parts like that, or he had different construction things that he was building over there. But there were certain areas that the kids were not allowed into, and they knew those areas to stay away from. They pretty much stayed by the campgrounds, the campfire, and the campers.
Right. Well, we'll flash some of those pictures of the campground on there, and I thought it looked pretty clean. So that was they went for immediate termination, right?
Yes.
And they placed you on the registry?
Yes, they did.
And that's typical behavior.
And how long was it before they placed you on the registry? When the first
By the
initial,
by the 1st of June, I received a letter that I was on the registry.
so in about 2 weeks after the case was open, they put you on this registry. You're going for failure to protect, I understand.
Yes.
And we've had a previous show on failure to protect Kimberly up in Kalkaska, and there's Faith Baden. She got failure to protect after she found out and reported it to the police that uncle was raping one of the boys. And in fact, all three of her children were removed and one was murdered there in Midland County by the adopted parents.
I have a question. At any point in time were you represented by an attorney?
When I went to my second hearing, I was, but at that point, they had already had the termination set, and the prosecutor refused to drop termination charges, so we had to go for a jury trial.
Okay, and you had a public defender?
Yes.
And who did you have?
Court-appointed.
Who did you have?
I have Sharon Parrish.
Okay. And Sharon didn't happen to bring this up, the fact that you haven't been represented and that...
Prior to that point, no, she did not.
She didn't bring any of that up?
No.
None of it?
And at this point, I do have a second attorney that I have brought in at the case, so I'll have two attorneys when I go to court for my
Okay.
jury.
And as you said earlier, that you weren't charged with anything in the police report,
No,
that came back clean on you.
right.
So this is all family court business on a preponderance of evidence. Now, you do have a jury trial coming up, I believe in September, and by that time this show will already air, but we'll definitely keep people up to date on what happened on that.
Okay.
Now, you haven't seen your son since, I believe, May 26th, you told me?
Yeah, May 26th at 5:07 was the exact time.
That was when they took...
That's when
Can
they
you
took him.
imagine how traumatized Anthony is?
Well, just from hearsay, when he was originally taken, he went with my sister, and then from there, I'm not sure the exact time frame, because I went into shock, but it was a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks, that he was transitioned to a distant cousin's home on my father's side of the family, and that's where he's remained at. But I know that he has told my sister several times, why can't I talk to my mom? Why can't I see my mom? What did I do wrong? I told the truth. Why'd they take me? And he does not understand why this is happening with him telling the truth, because he didn't do anything wrong and neither did I.
Well, that's sounds like this boy's being traumatized more by the state. He's been raped by a man, a 55-year-old man, and then taken from his mother when he told the truth. What does that tell a child?
That it's not okay. It's not okay to tell the truth because you'll be taken away from the only safe place you know.
And all I gotta say is, Maura Corrigan, is this protecting our most vulnerable citizens of the state of Michigan, our children?
Our kids are our future.
Innocent children.
Is there anything else you want to add to your story? You got a few minutes left here.
Just the fact that I hope and pray when I go into court that I can win this case. I know I'm going to be sit before a jury of 6 people, and they're going to decide the fate of my child and where he lives. And I hope whoever those 6 people are, that they really dig deep down in and search their hearts and don't just go on hearsay, but go on the evidence and what's going to be there or not be there, because we didn't do anything wrong.
Now I have to ask you this. You know, you being a foster parent to 80 children, and now going through what you're going through now, do you think that all those children that you have fostered have been abused and neglected?
Absolutely not. I know one child for a fact, and my sister was reminding me of that earlier. But I knew at the point when he was even brought into my home, they had said that he had slipped and fallen in the bathtub and broke his hip. And he was in a body cast, so he was removed from his mom for neglect and for her not protecting him. And he remained in my home, and I think several months he remained in a body cast for this hip, and he was just a little guy. And not even 2 weeks after having the cast off, my son Anthony, the one we're talking about, was running around the living room and just happened to have caught his toe on this kid's leg, and it snapped his leg in half. They ended up finding out at Children's Hospital that the child had brittle bone disease. Had nothing to do with neglect or abuse, but he was removed from his home anyways. And then at that point he was returned back home because they found out it wasn't anything Mom had done.
Now that you're in Central Registry, does that mean you can't you can't any more foster children? And have they?
I don't do foster care anymore. I haven't done it in about 5 years.
Well, being on the Central Registry, you wouldn't be able to foster, you wouldn't be able to adopt. If you have grandkids, you wouldn't be able to go to their school functions, as far as being a room mother or going on a field trip.
Yeah, you can't work in any type of facilities with children.
And I believe that goes over into coaching too. And this registry, who put you on there?
CPS.
The CPS lady.
What's interesting about that is 10 years ago, because whenever somebody calls, you're automatically put on the registry. And my former spouse, he had like 40 people call and complain about me. So I was on there, and I was told all I did was wrote a letter, and they took me off the registry. And I have worked for mental institutions and stuff like that with my degree, and so they've run my my credentials and stuff, and I'm not on the Central Registry. So all it took for me was just writing a letter. They took me off. They expunged my case. Now you have to actually go to court to get yourself.
Well, it
Actually,
can be.
I was told I can write a letter to
be,
get expunged out there, but I haven't.
You can write a letter to be expunged. The thing is, now it's a Class 1 or Class 2 offense. Now, failure to protect would be a Class 2 offense, I believe. But a CPS worker puts you on there based on a preponderance of evidence.
So just a phone call.
And you're not even represented to be on there. So this is something that we have to work on, something we have to go after, because it's affecting too many people's lives.
And CPS, the caseworker will come out, and what they'll do is they'll write in their report their opinion on what they believe you think or you feel, even though that's not what you think, not what you feel, and you haven't even said that. But they will just go ahead and say, she feels this, this, and this, when actually that's not even how you feel.
And one part in there that I don't believe, or that I put my own needs above my son's, and I've never put myself above any of my children, and also that I don't feel the seriousness of what has happened to my child. I don't feel that, I did anything wrong.
Well, how do they know how you feel?
They don't know how I feel. They've not walked in my shoes. They weren't out there. They didn't hear what I heard. They don't know what I know. And had I never went to this school and talked to the assistant principal, my son would still be home with me. And a part of me has thought many times, why didn't I just keep my mouth shut, go home and not tell anybody anything, not even the sheriff's department, and then my son and I would be fine.
Well, this is the fourth time.
But I had to do what was right for the other
I get a
children.
lot of stories here, and this is the fourth time that I've heard of this happening in the state of Michigan in the last 2 years, and I imagine it goes on a lot more than what I know. I imagine there's a lot more cases. And I'll tell you another thing that I was looking at somebody that, to tell you what workers do, I was looking at somebody that was trying to adopt their grandkids, and we were involved in this case, and we went through the place with the adopted worker. The adopted worker seen all the food in the freezer, seen all the food in the refrigerator, seen all the food in the cupboards. But in that refrigerator, there was one egg. And this adoption worker put in the report that she only had one egg in the refrigerator. So, they didn't lie, but they sure didn't tell the truth.
And it sounds on paper like there was nothing in the food or the cupboards, just one egg in the refrigerator.
Exactly. And they have too much power, and it's a very hard thing to fight in court.
I know my CPS report has 27 discrepancies in it that I have
And
found.
we've seen plenty of discrepancies where we went back and asked the children, did that actually happen? Did you actually say that to the CPS worker? And this is years later as they've gotten older.
Yeah, right.
I never said that. In one report, there was one where a 6-year-old was touching, 6-year-old boy told the CPS worker he was touching his 8-year-old sister. And this kid's 20 now. He goes, I never told that to the CPS worker. So I want to thank you for coming on, Leona. And
Thank you for having me.
we're going to pray that you get your child Stephen back.
Anthony.
Or Anthony back, excuse me. I don't know why I like calling him Stephen. He had a
Stephen
friend.
was his best friend.
He had a friend named Stephen, that's
Yeah.
why.
Stephen was his best friend.
And we want to wish you the best.